Before Joseph Stalin became one of the most feared dictators in history, he was not born into power, royalty, or comfort. He was born as Yosef Jugashvili in 1878 inches, Georgia, a small region of the Russian Empire, far from the grand halls of Moscow. His childhood was rough, poor, and violent. His father was a struggling shoemaker who drank heavily and beat him, while his mother wanted him to become a priest. For a while, that actually seemed possible. Stalin studied at a religious seminary, memorized scripture, and lived under strict rules, but underneath that quiet student image, something else was forming. He became drawn to revolutionary ideas, especially Marxism, and before long, he was not preparing to serve God. He was preparing to fight the empire. He joined underground political groups, helped organize strikes, spread illegal writings, and became involved in the dangerous world of revolutionaries, spies, and secret police. This was not the Stalin people usually imagine yet. He was not sitting behind a giant desk giving orders over the Soviet Union. He was moving through shadows, using fake names, getting arrested, escaping exile, and learning one lesson again and again. Power belonged to whoever was willing to take it and keep it. When the Russian Revolution finally exploded in 1917, Stalin was not the most famous revolutionary. Vladimir Lenin was the face of the movement. Leon Trotsky was the brilliant speaker and military organizer. Stalin was something different. He was quieter, colder, and easier to underestimate. He worked behind the scenes, building connections, placing loyal people in useful positions, and learning how the machinery of government actually worked. That was his real genius, and also what made him so dangerous. Some leaders win power by inspiring crowds. Stalin won power by controlling the system. After Lenin died in 1924, the Soviet Union entered a silent battle over who would take control. Many people expected Trotsky to become the next great leader because he was more famous, more charismatic, and more respected as a revolutionary. But Stalin had something Trotsky did not: patience. He slowly pushed his rivals aside, made alliances when they helped him, betrayed them when they became inconvenient, and turned the Communist Party into a weapon pointed in his direction. By the late 1920s, Stalin had become the most powerful man in the Soviet Union, and once he had power, he did not share it. Stalin wanted to transform the Soviet Union fast, no matter the cost. He believed the country had to industrialize quickly or be crushed by stronger enemies. So, he launched massive plans to build factories, mines, railroads, and military power. On paper, this was presented as progress. Posters showed smiling workers, powerful machines, and a bright socialist future. But behind those posters was a much darker reality. Millions of people were forced into impossible work conditions. Production targets were brutal. Failure was treated like betrayal. The state demanded results, and ordinary people paid the price. Then came one of the most devastating parts of Stalin's rule: forced collectivization. Stalin wanted the government to control agriculture, so private farms were taken and merged into state-run collective farms. Peasants who resisted were labeled enemies. Wealthier peasants, called kulaks, were arrested, deported, or killed. Grain was seized, villages were punished, and famine spread across parts of the Soviet Union, most famously in Ukraine, where millions died in the Holodomor. Stalin's government did not simply fail to protect people from disaster. It helped create the disaster, then silenced anyone who tried to talk about it. In your animation, this is where the colors can shift from bright red propaganda posters to gray villages, empty fields, and people standing in bread lines while officials walk past with clipboards. Stalin's rule was built not just on control of food, factories, and politics, but on fear. Fear became the air people breathed. A careless joke, a private complaint, or a suspicious friendship could destroy your life. The secret police watched, listened, and reported. People disappeared in the middle of the night. A knock at the door after dark became one of the most terrifying sounds in the Soviet Union. Sometimes the accused were real political opponents. Many times, they were innocent people caught in a machine that needed enemies to keep running. The Great Purge of the 1930s showed just how far Stalin was willing to go. Old revolutionaries, military officers, writers, scientists, party officials, and regular citizens were accused of plotting against the state. Show trials turned forced confessions into public theater. People admitted to crimes they did not commit because torture, threats, and fear left them no way out. Stalin did not just eliminate enemies, he eliminated anyone who might become an enemy someday. Even loyalty was not always enough to survive. That is what made his rule so terrifying. Under Stalin, people did not have to oppose the government to be punished. They only had to be suspected. Families learned not to speak openly at dinner. Children were taught to love the leader more than their own parents. Neighbors reported neighbors. Friends became careful with every word. And above all of it was Stalin's image, calm, serious, fatherly, watching from posters and portraits, presented as the wise protector of the nation while his own people lived in terror. He became known as the father of nations. But a father does not rule his children by making them afraid to whisper. Then came World War II, and Stalin's story became even more complicated. In 1939, he shocked the world by signing a pact with Nazi Germany, even though Hitler's ideology hated communism. The agreement gave both sides time and divided parts of Eastern Europe into spheres of control. But in 1941, Hitler betrayed the pact and launched Operation Barbarossa, the massive invasion of the Soviet Union. At first, the Soviet Union suffered catastrophic losses. Stalin had ignored warnings, purged many of his own experienced military officers, and left the country vulnerable. German armies pushed deep into Soviet territory, millions of soldiers were captured, and cities were surrounded. But the Soviet people fought with enormous sacrifice. Battles like Stalingrad became symbols of brutal resistance, where entire streets turned into war zones and survival itself became victory. Under Stalin's leadership, the Soviet Union eventually helped crush Nazi Germany, and this victory made Stalin look powerful on the world stage. But even here, the truth is darker than the propaganda. The victory was real, and the suffering of Soviet soldiers and civilians was real, but Stalin used that sacrifice to strengthen his own image. After the war, he did not loosen his grip, he tightened it. Eastern Europe fell under Soviet control. The Cold War began, and Stalin continued to rule through suspicion, censorship, prison camps, and political terror. The Gulag system, a vast network of forced labor camps, became one of the darkest symbols of his regime. Prisoners were sent into freezing regions, mines, forests, and construction projects, often for minor accusations or no real crime at all. Many never returned. And yet, while all this happened, Stalin's face was everywhere. Statues, songs, newspapers, school books, and paintings turned him into a living legend. That is how dictatorships survive. They do not only punish people for speaking the truth, they replace the truth with a story everyone is forced to repeat. Stalin's story ended in 1953, not with a revolution, not with justice, and not with a dramatic courtroom scene. He suffered a stroke and was found helpless after hours without proper aid, partly because the people around him were terrified of disturbing him. Think about how dark that is. The man who made everyone fear him so much created a world where even his own guards hesitated when he needed help. He died soon after, leaving behind an empire of fear, a country transformed by industry and war, and a legacy stained by famine, purges, executions, deportations, prison camps, and millions of broken lives. Stalin was not evil because he lost control. He was terrifying because he had control and used it without mercy. He understood that power was not only about armies and speeches. It was about files, informants, fear, hunger, silence, and making people doubt even the person standing next to them. He took a revolution that promised equality and turned it into a system where one man's paranoia could decide who lived, who vanished, and who was erased from history. And that is the real lesson of Joseph Stalin. A ruler does not need to shout every day to be feared. Sometimes the most dangerous ruler is the one sitting quietly at the center of the system, moving names on a list, signing papers, and letting an entire nation learn that survival depends on silence.